Hello, hello. In this video, I'll be reviewing the first Skulduggery Pleasant book, which I believe is called Playing with Fire, but I could be wrong on that because it's always in my mind it's just been the first Skulduggery Pleasant book. So this is, just, I guess, for context for you, this has been a reread for me, so it's not the first time I'm reading it. So yeah, quick spoiler-free review. This is a really, really good book, really fun, enjoyable, young adult. Everything sort of slots into place. It's got a bit of action, it's got a bit of mystery, it's got a bit of like violence, I guess it sort of comes under action, but it's just sort of got kind of ticks all the boxes. You know, you want to just read a quick young adult sort of fantasy book, which kind of is creative and interesting, but not necessarily going to like drag you through the mud. You know, make you have a super steep learning curve and annoy you and pull a Brandon Sanderson on you. And I say it in the most loving way because I do love Brandon Sanderson, but there is something satisfying about reading a book that doesn't, or listening to a book that doesn't last 50 hours. So I guess this spoiler-free review of this is a really good book that doesn't last 50 hours. So to move into spoilers, this book, I think, suffers. I've just finished doing my sort of reviews for the last Percy Jackson books, and I think it's actually quite sort of interesting to look at them side by side, because this book suffers from a lot of the same problems that Percy Jackson suffers from, and a lot of the same pros that Percy Jackson has, which is namely that this book is very funny and interesting, and sort of creatively interesting, I would say. Like, the magic system is interesting, all the magic systems. It's creative, it's funny, like there's constant dry humor thrown out between the characters, particularly by Skulduggery, and sort of reflected back at him by Valkyrie/Stephanie. And so it is funny, and it's really enjoyable, and it's creative in the way its action is sort of portrayed, and it's creative in the way the magic system work, and the world building, whilst it's not super expansive, is creative in its own way, and enjoyable and fun. But then, like I said, it also suffers from the same sort of Percy Jackson flaws, which is that a lot of stuff doesn't make a ton of sense, and either is not explained or isn't explained in a way that is super kind of satisfying and grounding. And so it does sort of suffer from that problem where you're like, but why? Why are you doing that? Like, for example, the one that sort of pops to mind, first of all, is that the cleavers, the guards in the sanctuary, they have scythes, and it's like, well, first of all, scythes are not the most effective bladed weapon, right? I mean, there's a reason why people had swords and spears and stuff, right? And we don't go around fighting with scythes. But also, why the fuck are you using bladed weapons? Guns exist. You know what I mean? And so there is that, and so, like I say, it sort of suffers from that flaw, and some stuff doesn't make a ton of sense. But with that said, there's so many pros to this. The characters are really interesting. Skulduggery is a really interesting sort of deep character, and particularly in the first book, you just learn enough about him to be like, oh, I wonder what's going on with this guy. But you don't learn enough about him to really, like, you sort of just wet your toes, and so you want a lot more. So Skulduggery forms this really sort of compelling character that you're kind of attracted to. And then Stephanie is sort of like an audience, Stephanie/Valkyrie is sort of an audience insert a little bit. It's sort of supposed to be like, oh, I'm like her, I live a normal life, I wish I could live a cool life. So that's sort of the vibe you're supposed to go with. But she does sort of have enough personality of her own that it doesn't feel so obvious that that's what's going on. And so she kind of has enough presence that it's, you don't feel like, oh, this is just a sort of audience insert character. So, that's cool. And then we have, I guess the world kind of feels fleshed out enough that the characters in it kind of feel a bit real, like, and they're a bit nuanced, like, for example, the elders, they're kind of, like, dumb and kind of, like, not sort of understanding what's going on, but at the same token, you kind of see where they're coming from in that way, and then they turn around and change their perspective. Of course, spoilers, they die, but, it's kind of that idea where the world kind of feels like it's made up of people of 3D personalities, rather than, for example, one problem that I had with Harry Potter is that Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, is just hilariously dumb and inept, and it's like, Voldemort's not back, how can he be back? There's no evidence that he's back. Whereas in this book, we have that sort of same idea playing out, where it's like, oh, this guy can't be evil, he's definitely not evil, can't be evil, but then when they're presented with evidence, they sort of change their mind and sort of makes them feel a lot more three-dimensional and interesting. And we have like characters like China, who is sort of kind of the same thing, where she's not evil, she's not good, probably a bit closer to evil than good, but you kind of have this sort of three-dimensional character, right? And I think that helps a lot. And Skulduggery is the same. Obviously, a little bit spoilery here for the rest of the series, but he's not the greatest guy. He's not the worst guy, but he's not the greatest guy either. And so it's kind of fun to have these more nuanced 3D characters in a young adult book, and I think it's a little bit refreshing, particularly sort of given some of the stuff that is around in the young adult genre. So that's really, really good. Like I said, the magic system is fun. I really enjoy sort of elemental magic versus adept magic thing, and elemental magic is just cool. We've sort of seen it a million times, but it's just cool, and so you're not really sad to have seen it. And the plot of this book is it's not amazing, but it does sort of function quite well. Where we have bad person wants XYZ thing, we must stop bad person from getting XYZ thing. Oh no, bad person got XYZ thing. What are we going to do? We must defeat them. Eventually we defeat them. And then we get XYZ thing, which of course doesn't work afterwards, but, that's beside the point. And so I think the story, the plot is not amazing, but it's functional enough that it sort of kind of gives you a really nice introduction into this series, into this world, because it kind of, by virtue of plot, you sort of take on a whistle-stop tour of Skulduggery Pleasant sort of universe and world, and you see a lot of different people and a lot of different stuff, which kind of allows you. So even though you might not be loving the plot to bits, although it's fine. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but it's, even though it's a bit basic, it sort of functions as a vehicle to really drag you into this universe and to get you to enjoy the characters and the setting, which I think functions really well. It's also really interesting seeing Valkyrie's parents, or Stephanie's parents, are just sort of normal, loving people who are just trying to figure out what to do with their teenage daughter, which I think functions. It just feels a bit more interesting to me than these like families where parents are just terrible people. You're like, oh, okay, well, they're just terrible. There's no nuance here. I don't have to feel bad about leaving them. For example, there's one really interesting scene where Valkyrie's like, because she has a reflection that lives her life for her, but the reflection is kind of like not very loving or anything, and she's like, if I die here, the reflection's just going to live the rest of my life. My parents are not going to think they love me, that I love them. And I just thought that was a really interesting sort of line, which shows that what Valkyrie's doing is actually a bit selfish, right? Putting herself in harm's way like this. And so it kind of just adds to that 3D perspective you get from like all the characters in the series, where they all feel like, even Valkyrie, your main character, she's mostly good, 99% good, but she's just that little bit of thing where you're like, yeah, you are a little bit selfish, aren't you? And so, yeah, honestly, a really, really solid book. It's a fantastic first entry in a series, and it really drags you. And even if I remember reading this as a kid and being like, damn, this is a good series, I can't wait to read more. And even now as an adult, I guess I'm technically an adult, I still sort of feel that same thing where I'm like, damn, I really want to learn more about these characters. Of course, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you already know about these characters. You already read the series, Michael, you dolt. But, it's that sort of vibe where you just sort of feel sucked in and you can't wait to read more. A little note on the audiobook, the guy who's reading it has a very strong Irish accent. So, yeah, just a random fun fact for you. But yes, thanks very much for watching and have a great day. See you later.